It is stated in advance that this conspiracy has been jointly resolved by China and Russia through a treaty in black and white. More on that later in this article. Let's first look at the news in May 2022. From May 22 to 28, the 75th meeting of the World Health Assembly was held in Geneva, Switzerland. The meeting discussed the amendments to the international health regulations. This so-called discussion is actually an extremely fierce struggle. Before the meeting was held, there was a lot of voices at home and abroad, and many friends strongly urged their government to refuse to sign this pandemic clause. Once the clause is signed, it will lead to signatory countries surrendering part of their national sovereignty, the WHO will override their own public health sovereignty and civil rights, and leave the world at the mercy of one big government. The appeals and denunciations of many patriotic people finally played a curb role in resisting the WHO's attempt to establish a big government. The pandemic clause was not passed. The amendment, proposed by the Democratic Party of the United States, proposes 13 controversial amendments to the original international health regulations. Official representatives of wealthy developed countries such as Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States strongly supported the amendment and urged other countries to join them in signing away national sovereignty. However, the amendment was strongly resisted by many participating countries. On May 25, the first indication that events were unlikely to proceed in the direction the Masons were pushing. First, unexpectedly, many African countries took the lead in refusing to sign the clause. The African country Botswana read out a statement on behalf of its 47 African member states, declaring that they would collectively stop supporting the amendment. Many African member states expressed strong concern and dissatisfaction with this. Subsequently, the representatives of China and Russia strongly voiced their opposition to the WHO amendment. Under the influence of China and Russia, many other countries have also stated that they do not support the WHO amendment. These countries include Brazil, India, South Africa, Iran, and Malaysia. In particular, Brazil has made it clear that it will completely withdraw from the WHO and will never allow its people to be overridden by the WHO. In the end, the WHO and its supporters, the United States, Britain, and France, were forced to make concessions and shelve the WHO amendment. What is the pandemic clause? It includes mandatory quarantine, compulsory vaccination, mandatory contact tracing, mandatory health checks, globally controlled by one government. To put it bluntly, international forces want to use the hands of the WHO. Under the so-called pandemic situation, the medical sovereignty and anti-epidemic sovereignty of all countries are under the control of the WHO. This is actually a shocking conspiracy by the Freemasons, starting from the fields of medical treatment and epidemic prevention, and gradually publicly manipulating the sovereignty of various countries. In a word, the WHO pandemic treaty would override the public health sovereignty and civil rights of 194 countries, leaving the world at the mercy of one big government. At the beginning, the eight-power allied forces could only interfere with China's sovereignty by burning, killing, and looting. When Japan invaded China, it also killed hundreds of thousands or millions of people before it substantially seized China's sovereignty. Today, the international powers actually fantasize about controlling China's sovereignty with a single treaty. What a wishful dream. Everyone knows that this year, China's economy has achieved overwhelming results compared with other countries in the world. For example, Japan and South Korea, which had trade surpluses with China for decades, both ran deficits this year. China's economy this year can be described as a unique scene here. The reason for such a good situation is inseparable from the central government's timely transformation of the Class B and A management policy into the B&B management policy. But if the sovereignty of the anti-epidemic policy is in the hands of international forces, what will they do? There is no doubt that demon moths will emerge. At that time, the Chinese economy will suffer. Under the circumstances that China and Russia took the lead in rejecting it, it was unexpected that international forces would make a comeback at the WHO General Assembly in 2023. Almost again a few days after May 25th, they brought up the topic of world sovereignty again. In order to avoid repeating the mistakes of last year, the international forces have changed their approach, first strengthening the authority of the main body of the WHO, so that it can make decisions on mandatory vaccination and mandatory isolation in emergency situations. At the same time, the World Health Organization and Bill Gates also agreed that there will be more deadly viruses in the near future, and they are full of intentions to try again and are determined to win. China and Russia have long been prepared for this. As early as March this year, when Chinese leaders visited Russia, there was one item in the joint statement on deepening the comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership in the new era as a result of their cooperation. The two sides will continue to carry out cooperation in health and epidemic prevention to deal with the threat of the epidemic. The two sides will jointly oppose attempts to limit the sovereign rights of countries in the prevention and control of infectious diseases, early warning, and response to biological threats by forming a legally binding mechanism within the framework of international organizations. This article is a rare strong statement issued by China in response to serious problems that international organizations may cause. It means, it is true that some forces, in the hands of the WHO, use the so-called international law and international treaties to override the sovereignty of countries. Its primary purpose is to seize the power of prevention and early warning of infectious diseases in various countries, as well as the sovereign power of countering biological warfare. China and Russia maintain a high degree of vigilance against such plots and are determined to jointly prevent such plots. Obviously, international forces felt that Russia was in the way and hindered their plot, so they took measures. On May 15, WHO announced the official closure of the organization's Moscow office. This effectively expelled Russia from WHO membership. It's just that the formal expulsion needs to be voted by the member states. If it is put to a vote, it cannot be successful. That's why WHO resorted to the insidious means of closing offices. The general media's interpretation of this matter is that the main reason is that Russia released the evidence of the United States research on the new coronavirus in the Ukrainian biological laboratory to the public, and gave the evidence to the World Health Organization and the United Nations. The two organizations ignored it and refused. Sent people to investigate the US biological laboratory in Ukraine. However, Feng Jiaruping believes that the more important reason is that international forces are trying to kick Russia out of the WHO in order to implement a super conspiracy plan to seize the sovereignty of countries around the world. Sure enough, on May 17, the Russian State Duma stated that it would discuss the possibility of Russia withdrawing from the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization. This expresses Russia's strong dissatisfaction with the WHO. What is particularly interesting is that, just before the annual meeting of the WHO, at the European Summit, someone bitterly revealed that the new crown originated from the drug production and release by the United States. The message is as follows. Recently, heavy news came from the Third International New Crown Summit organized by the European Parliament in Brussels, the capital of Belgium. An American pointed out in his speech that the new crown virus was made and released by the United States to launch biological warfare and provide vaccines. The company makes a profit. The American named Martin is said to be an expert and the owner of an American company. At the beginning of his speech, he pointed out that he had warned people all over the world more than 10 years ago, saying that the weaponization of nature has had terrible consequences for human beings. Martin played slides on the spot, all of which were facts, official and public reports, data, and official explanations of the US government. The first fact is that the coronavirus was actually isolated by the United States as early as 1965. The United States used and even modified the coronavirus for various reasons. The second fact is that in 1966, the United States and the United Kingdom established the first transatlantic coronavirus data sharing experiment, and the United States and the United Kingdom started the coronavirus experiment. This is a long-planned thing. The third fact is that in 1967, the United States violated the Biological and Chemical Weapons Treaty and conducted the first coronavirus experiment on humans. The news is only below. What we have to reflect on now is that since the virus was created by the Americans and managed to spread it, then they manipulated the WHO to use the so-called new regulations and agreements to manipulate the sovereignty of various countries. Is this a series of calculations? If it doesn't work this year, then next year, the year after, and the year after that, will international forces continue to make and distribute drugs, and then use authoritative experts from various countries to spread their opinions, manipulate WHO issues for themselves, and control the sovereignty of various countries to continue to engage in what about the new demon moth? It should be pointed out that these plots are extremely deep and sinister. China has a deep insight into its treachery and is taking all-round measures. Tomorrow we will write about what measures China has taken in other areas. Three Japanese Coast Guard ships forcibly crossed the Taiwan Strait early this morning. Our Coast Guard ship 1302 intercepted it and drove one of the Japanese Coast Guard ships away from the northern entrance of the Taiwan Strait, while the other two Japanese Coast Guard ships took the opportunity to cross the Taiwan Strait from north to south. According to the data from the ACE Ship Information System, at around midnight Beijing time today, 3 Japanese Coast Guard ships, Terima, Ikma, and Motoview, were on the grounds of avoiding the Pacific Hurricane Mawar, Figure 1. Without informing us in advance, they were divided into 2 batches, trying to forcefully cross the Taiwan Strait from the northern entrance of the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese Coast Guard ship responded firmly to the rude behavior of the Japanese Coast Guard ship. It can be seen from the ACE map that in the early hours of this morning Beijing time, our Coast Guard 1302 ship closely pressed the towed Japanese Coast Guard Terima. It was forced to turn and leave the northern mouth of the Taiwan Strait, Figure 2. But at the same time, 2 other Japanese Coast Guard ships, Motoview and Ikma, which entered the Taiwan Strait ahead of schedule, took the opportunity to cross the Taiwan Strait. But we also noticed that in Figure 3, another Chinese Coast Guard ship can be observed at the southern entrance of the Taiwan Strait, implementing long-distance surveillance on the 2 Japanese Coast Guard ships. I have to say that judging from the actions of 3 Japanese Coast Guard ships crossing the Taiwan Strait early this morning, this seems to be another new trick by external forces trying to interfere in the situation in the Taiwan Strait, because in terms of international law, Coast Guard ships are classified as civilian ships. Therefore, in terms of international law, these ships can pass through the international waters of the Taiwan Strait without notifying the country concerned, but obviously, the international impact caused by this is no less than that of military ships. This trick is quite ghostly. But as for whether Japan will make this kind of operation a routine operation in the future, we still need to observe further. While the G7 group was discussing how to give Russia another heavy blow, an armed force called the Free Russian Legion suddenly emerged, causing the Russian-Ukrainian battlefield to fall into unprecedented chaos. In the face of this powerful armed force, the Russian side was at a loss for a while, and now something is wrong. According to Red Star News, recently, an armed force of unknown origin suddenly broke into Belgorod Oblast in Russia and occupied 4 local settlements. The Russian army immediately launched a fierce exchange of fire with the opponent, resulting in the elimination of 39 members of the unit and the capture of several others. Immediately after the attack, the Russian Ministry of Defense, Federal Security Service and Border Guards quickly reported to President Putin. At the same time, the outside world was also extremely shocked. Judging from the above news, this attack is very different from previous sneak attacks by the Ukrainian army. Previously, Russia was not safe and sound, especially in the border areas near Ukraine. From time to time, drones of the Ukrainian army carried bombs and carried out air strikes. However, this time armed groups directly occupied settlements in the Belgorod region. You must know that since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine lasted for more than a year, no unit of the Ukrainian army has dared to directly occupy Russian territory. For this reason, the Ukrainian side also hastily spoke out, disregarding its relationship with this armed force, calling it a Russian anti-government armed organization that helped Ukraine fight. The implication is, this is a contradiction within your Russia and has nothing to do with us. But is it really not about Ukraine? It must not be that easy. Just after occupying several villages in Belgorod, this self-proclaimed Free Russian Legion announced that it would unite with the Ukrainian army to fight against the Russian army. If it is said that this has nothing to do with Ukraine, no one will believe it. Moreover, Kremlin spokesman Peskov made it clear in an interview that this Free Russian Legion is an armed group in Ukraine, not the Russian rebels they said. Of course, the public is justified, and the mother-in-law is justified. In the absence of conclusive evidence, both Russia and Ukraine can attribute this armed force to the other party. However, an armed force of dozens of people is a small matter, but it may not be so simple if other things are involved, such as nuclear weapons. According to reports, a few kilometers away from the site where the Free Russian Legion fought the Russian army, a facility storing tactical nuclear weapons. The facility is part of the Russian Strategic Missile Forces and stores 204mm tactical nuclear munitions. It is worth mentioning that the nuclear bomb stored there is one of the targets of this armed force. This is why the place where the Russian army exchanged fire is so close to the place where nuclear weapons are stored. Just imagine, nuclear weapons are devastating. Once they fall into the hands of unrestrained armed groups, what kind of consequences will it cause? For this reason, shortly after the attack, Russia hastily transferred nuclear weapons in the area to avoid accidents. All in all, although this attack on Russia did not cause greater disasters and losses, it is tantamount to sounding the alarm for Russia. An armed group of unknown origin dared to openly occupy Russian territory with tanks and armored vehicles, indicating that today's Russia has reached the moment of internal and external troubles. If it is true, as Ukraine said, that there are armed forces inside Russia that rebel, it is hard to say whether there will be a second or third branch next. The United States has continuously increased the delivery of weapons to Ukraine, which has made the United States arms dealers and other relevant interest groups make war fortunes. Recently, CBS disclosed the inside story of the U.S. arms dealers supplying weapons. The arms dealers demanded extravagant prices, and the U.S. Department of Defense allowed them to rip off. Shay Assad, former senior contract negotiator of the U.S. Department of Defense, exorbitant prices are unreasonable and unreasonable. Shay Assad was the executive vice president and chief contract negotiator of the U.S. military giant Raytheon and a former senior contract negotiator for the Department of Defense under multiple U.S. administrations. Shay said the DoD pays exorbitant prices for nearly every weapon, including radars, missiles, helicopters, planes, submarines, and more, even screws and nuts. For example, Shay said that in 2015, some negotiators discovered that Lockheed Martin and Boeing had overcharged the U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. allies by hundreds of millions of dollars for the Patriot 3 missile, and the profit was as high as 40%. 15%-20% of the average profit level. Additionally, arms dealers inflate prices by inflating manufacturing costs and time. Moderator, can the U.S. government buy from other sources? Shay Assad, former senior contract negotiator of the U.S. Department of Defense, there is no other channel. Many of the weapons that are now being shipped to Ukraine have only one supplier, and these companies know this. Shay believes that one of the reasons why arms contractors charge sky-high prices is the monopoly of the U.S. military industry. In the 1990s, more than 50 defense contractors were merged into 5 military giants. What followed was a soaring price of weapons. CBS reported that in 1991, the purchase price of a shoulder-fired Stinger missile was $25,000 US, but now it has risen to more than $400,000 US. Not only has the industry become monopolized, but the Pentagon has loosened oversight, laying off some 13,000 employees who negotiated and oversaw defense contracts. Shay Assad, former senior contract negotiator of the U.S. Department of Defense, supervisors, negotiators, engineers, project managers, more than 50% of the personnel were laid off. In addition, some subcontractors have also profited by substantially increasing the prices of components. For example, Shay previously discovered that the Department of Defense paid $119 million for parts that should have cost $28 million. A number of senators wrote to U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin last week, calling for an investigation into the widespread phenomenon of excessive asking prices by defense contractors. Shay Assad, former senior contract negotiator of the U.S. Department of Defense, if you are willing to allow these companies to blackmail you, these companies will look at you and say, I will continue to blackmail you, because I know you don't have the courage to do it. Interests are tied to the U.S. military-industrial complex, provoking war and making money. In fact, arms dealers are able to ask the Ministry of Defense for exorbitant prices because they spend huge sums of money on lobbying. In the United States, the U.S. military-industrial complex, formed by arms dealers, the military, and politicians out of common interests, has incited confrontation and conflict around the world for decades, taking the opportunity to make war windfalls. According to statistics, during the war in Afghanistan alone, the 5 major U.S. military giants Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman received $2.02 trillion in defense spending. Contract. Over the past 20 years, the 5 companies have spent $1.1 billion on lobbying. In March of this year, the U.S. Department of Defense announced the budget for the 2024 fiscal year, which is $842 billion US, a record high, and almost half of the funds will go to arms contractors. The Harvard Political Review magazine previously commented that the U.S. military is full of waste, greed, and fraud. The future development and achievements of children are closely related to the parents' family education and training methods. The ability of some children to earn a lot of money when they grow up is inseparable from their childhood experiences and personality traits. Next, let's analyze in detail which characteristics of children are more likely to become big money earners. High self-discipline and sense of responsibility. People who make a lot of money usually have a high degree of self-discipline and a sense of responsibility, which is a very important quality. Self-discipline means being able to control and manage yourself, and being responsible means being able to take responsibility and take work seriously. This quality needs to be cultivated in children's daily life, such as controlling the time spent watching TV and playing games, and completing homework and tasks on time. Positive thinking and innovative spirit. People who make a lot of money are usually positive thinkers and innovative spirits, and they are able to constantly innovate and explore new opportunities and areas. This way of thinking and innovative spirit needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to ask questions, think and explore unknown areas, and cultivate children's creativity and problem-solving ability. Good interpersonal and social skills. People who make a lot of money usually have good interpersonal and social skills, and they are able to get along and work with people from different backgrounds and cultures. This kind of social ability and interpersonal relationship needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to communicate, cooperate, and share with others, and developing children's social skills and problem-solving skills. Continuous learning and self-improvement. Those who make a lot of money usually have the ability of continuous learning and self-improvement. They can continuously learn and master new knowledge and skills to adapt to changing market needs. This kind of learning and self-improvement ability needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to participate in various interest classes and courses, cultivating children's learning and thinking ability, and cultivating children's self-awareness and self-reflection ability. Qualities of optimism and self-confidence. People who make a lot of money are usually optimistic and confident. They can actively face challenges and difficulties and maintain a good attitude and mood. This kind of optimistic and confident quality needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to face challenges and difficulties, cultivating children's self-confidence and courage, and allowing children to develop an optimistic attitude and emotions. Good physical fitness and athletic ability. People who make a lot of money are usually physically and athletically able to maintain a healthy body and mind. This kind of physical fitness and athletic ability needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to participate in outdoor sports and exercise, and cultivating children's physical fitness and coordination ability. The spirit of love to learn and explore. People who make a lot of money usually have a spirit of love of learning and exploration. They keep learning and exploring new fields and knowledge in order to maintain their competitiveness and innovation ability. This spirit of love for learning and exploration needs to be cultivated in children's early education, such as encouraging children to read various books and articles, and cultivating children's interest in learning and curiosity. The above 7 characteristics are some basic qualities that children will be able to earn a lot of money when they grow up. Of course, the development and achievement of each child is different, which is related to factors such as the parent's family education and training methods, the child's personal talent and effort. Therefore, parents need to provide targeted training and guidance based on the actual situation and characteristics of their children to help them discover their own strengths and potentials and realize their own life value and social contribution.